$3,500, Apple, are you crazy?
Boy, ain't no way, boy.
Okay, there's so much to cover from the WWDC presentation, so let's get right into it. Hey, Danny with the DMGT here, your new favorite place for all things music, gaming, and tech, and this one's gonna be tech heavy. Before we get to the Vision Pro and the clickbaity title, I'm sorry, I know that it's a different device than the PSVR 2, but I think there's enough similarities here that I have some reasons for that comparison. Anyways, let's start from the top. A new 15-inch M2 MacBook Air with 4 different colors. I think the MacBook lineup needs to get a little bit more streamlined because now we have a 13-inch Air, a 14-inch Pro, a 15-inch Air, and a 16-inch Pro. Luckily, this means that the 13-inch M2 Air is now price dropped to $1099, which I think is a solid value for what you get. The Mac Studio got an update with a new chip called the M2 Ultra, which is effectively two M2 Maxes put together. Apple Silicon just continues to get better and better. This one can support 22 streams of 8K simultaneous playback. And then Apple immediately one-ups it with the Mac Pro, which is back. Same deal as Studio, it has an M2 Ultra and it supports up to 6 Gen 4 PCIe slots. Honestly, I have no idea who needs this much horsepower, and the price sort of reflects that at $69.99. I thought for sure it was going to be at least 10 grand. I was a couple of grand off, but I don't know. It's a very powerful device that I'm sure there are some very niche use cases for. Also, if it feels like I'm speeding through some of these, that's because Apple's presentation felt exactly like that, and I'll touch on some of the more stuff that was more interesting to me. And we'll start that slowdown on iOS 17 with iPhone. We got quite a few quality of life improvements that aren't really groundbreaking but are interesting enough. Posters that replace caller ID images, FaceTime messages, which is effectively voicemail but with FaceTime. I don't know why someone wouldn't just send you a video, but in case they were trying to call you, they have that option. Now, one of the more useful ones is live voicemail, where you can now get live transcriptions of someone leaving you a voice message as they are recording. For any other old heads, this is very similar to an answering machine back in the day, but now you get the live transcription on your phone as they're leaving the message. Apple pitched it as a more convenient way to see if maybe there's an emergency that you have to attend to, but if you ask me, I think iPhone users are going to have a little bit of fun with it, saying, I know that you can hear me, pick up the phone. For iMessages, when the group chat is blowing up, catch up is now an option for you if there are too many messages to catch up all at once. I do like that they cleaned up the bottom of messages. It's now just a plus that then opens up all the apps for stickers and things like that in your messages. It just declutters that a little bit, and now you can use your own photos to make stickers. All of that, I think, is just Apple's silent way of saying we are never going to adopt RCS. Some AirDrop updates includes now Name Drop, which is a faster way to share your contact information with someone by just holding your phones next to each other. I think the concept of this is really nice, but I don't know how it's going to feel in practice if you just have your phone lying next to someone else's by accident. Is that going to get annoying? I don't know. We'll have to see how that plays out in real life. Lots of share play updates. You can now watch something at the same time as someone else, stay on that FaceTime call and watch a Netflix movie, a YouTube video, a Twitch stream. A lot of these ideas seem like they were clearly born out of quarantine and the pandemic, and now it's seeing implementation today. It looks like autocorrect on iOS is going to get slightly less annoying. You can go back to the original word that you typed out instead of the auto-corrected word. They're adding a built-in journaling app called Journal, which uses specific moments and apps and times of days. If you're on a workout, you went for a walk at a specific location. They ended up talking a lot about mental health things and keeping track of how you're feeling, and this was the first thing that they really touched on with that. Standby is one of the more fascinating updates. Now the always-on display can show you different information. You can adjust the widgets that you see as you have your iPhone in standby mode. It's a welcome addition. It just feels like this should have been here at iOS 16 or even 15. They did remove the need to say hey for Hey Siri. It's just Siri, and now you can chain commands together. Moving on to iPadOS, there were two major features that were the most interesting to me. That's annotations and live collaboration annotations with PDFs using the Notes app. And maybe more importantly, you can now interact with widgets on your screen. So instead of having the widget only display information and then tapping into it, opening up the full app, you can now actually interact with the application directly from the screen where the widget is. I think this really starts completing the vision of what widgets are supposed to be on the iPad in the first place, but it's nice that we finally got that. Speaking of widgets, moving on to macOS, the new one is called Sonoma, and it's bringing widgets to the desktop and not just tucked away in the notification center. In my opinion, this feels a little bit cluttered for my likes. I like having my desktop completely clear, but it's just nice to have that option, and the way that they implemented it while using other apps is actually very useful. They sort of go translucent. It follows what's going on in the background of your screen, so they're still present at a glance, but they aren't completely distracting. As a complete aside, I found it very funny that Craig called out Apollo for Reddit, specifically after the whole Reddit API debacle is going on.
So I can see my Apollo for Reddit.
And one of the biggest surprises to macOS was a dedicated section to gaming. macOS Sonoma now has a game mode that optimizes performance and resource management when you're gaming. It even includes some improved performance to audio latency and controller input latency. They're also tuning some improved tools for developing games on Mac. All of that culminating with Hideo Kojima making an appearance during the gaming section of the Apple event. Apple and dedicated resources to gaming is something I never thought I'd see. He specifically came out to talk about Death Stranding coming to the Mac store directly, which is interesting. And while you should still not buy buy a Mac specifically to play video games, it's nice that you have that option if you do go with a Mac. They added a video presentation mode to video conferences, which automatically takes whatever's on your display to the background so you can like walk around and like do a traditional presentation style. This one feels a little bit weird for me, especially knowing that Apple and a lot of major tech companies are forcing people back into the office. It feels like forcing people back in the office seems like a clear way to stop adoption to this virtual tool that you're providing. I don't know, it just felt like one of those things that they're delivering something but conflicting with their actions somewhere else. They're doing collections now in Safari, which is similar to profiles on Chrome. So if you're a student at work or at home, you can have 3 different profiles for each of those things that you do. And then web apps, which is basically a bookmark to your applications folder in the Mac, just sort of a more convenient way to access web apps that you're using regularly. All of those feel like more productivity tool and work management, but it's nice that you have those options now. Moving on to audio and home, this was a segment that I was really interested in. Craig did this really gnarly guitar solo. I don't know if that was actually him. I think AirPods Pro are currently Apple's best device, hands down. And they're bringing some really cool improvements to this. Adaptive control to hear through and noise cancellation is really interesting. So depending on your environment and the noise going on around you, it'll adjust the transparency and the noise cancellation. If someone walks up to you and begins a conversation, the AirPods Pro will now automatically lower the music volume. And hear through will focus on voice frequencies specifically. I think this is a really neat feature. They mentioned improved audio handoff between all your Apple devices, but that's all they really mentioned about that, so I'll have to see what that looks like in practice. And then they added intelligent AirPlay based on like your behaviors and location. So if you're in your kitchen and that's when you typically listen to a podcast or music, AirPlay will automatically suggest turning on the music on the HomePod in your kitchen, for example. And then those SharePlay features that I was talking about earlier, CarPlay now has SharePlay. So if CarPlay is detected in your car and someone else has an iPhone, they can join the session to start playing some jams. I think that's just a cool way to allow your passengers to play music on your car. Similar deal with the SharePlay, tvOS got similar updates where you can watch something on TV, stay on a FaceTime call, and then watch something together. Again, I don't really know who's doing FaceTime calls on their TV regularly, but it feels like an idea that was born out of the pandemic. On to watchOS, a lot of health, hiking, cycling updates there. They added some Snoopy watch faces if you're interested in that. But on to the main event, because Tim Cook hit us with the very iconic
One more thing.
The Apple Mixed Reality headset is here, it is real, and it is called Vision Pro. Okay, so obviously, probably like you, have a lot of thoughts about this already. But let's just quickly run down through exactly what this is before I get into my thoughts. Apple really focused and hammered home on this phrase called spatial computing. This is not just a gaming headset or a Quest competitor or a PSVR 2 competitor, even though I have that in the title. The idea here is to use your own space and then compute around it using hand gestures, eye tracking, and voice. I think what's really interesting here is that they're not shipping with any controller hardware. It's all going to be gestures and eye tracking. So on that tech concept alone, I think that's very fascinating. But they spent a lot of time talking about viewing pictures, pulling up your web browsers, doing work from wherever you are, which in theory makes sense, but as a headset, I don't know why you wouldn't just use your laptop, an iPad, or your desktop. Of course, they talked a lot about the flexibility of like making the display as big as you want, almost like a projector, having a movie theater-like experience for movies that you're watching. They talked about all the sensors that are in this device that obviously are creating volumetric environments that you can enter, so there's still some heavy focus on virtual worlds and virtual spaces. I do appreciate that they're being a little bit mindful of spatial awareness, so if someone walks up to you and wants to talk, the Vision Pro display will pass through to the person that's sat next to you. If you're recording or taking photos or videos, the external display on the headset starts pulsating lights so people know and are aware that you are recording or taking video. This has an M2 chip built inside and what they're calling an R1 chip that is processing all the sensors that are on the headset. There's a lot of sensors, cameras, IR sensors, LiDAR sensors, all of this to keep track of your environments and create that really immersive experience behind the headset. Now, although about half of the presentation was more about like digital integration with your life and some productivity conversations, I know that's like a gross word to say, but then they brought out Bob Iger, which is the CEO of Walt Disney. He talked about Disney Plus and that being available right away with the Vision Pro. It'll have its own app store, it'll support a lot of iPad and iPhone apps as well out of the gate, but this entire headset is going to have a new OS called Vision OS. Obviously, that makes sense, right? It's tracking your eyes, hand gestures. Those are all different behaviors that have a little bit of overlap with multi-touch, but it's going to require its own set of developments and features. Now, I know that this is a tech and music and video games channel, but I'm personally a really big sports guy, and the fact that they showed 3D basketball games, I think is one of the things that's selling me the most. Not so much from a I want to get this right now standpoint, but up until that point, I was a little bit on the fence, and that's like one feature where I'm really interested. The design itself is really interesting. They talked about spending a lot of time with a diverse set of people to design the ergonomics around this, how your face is going to be presented. They didn't mention the exact pixel count, but they did mention that it's more than 4K resolution. It includes its own 2 speaker pods, which uses what they're calling audio ray tracing. It seems like similar technology to the HomePod, where it's gathering data of your room and environments and then tuning the audio to make that spatial audio sound more realistic. During all these demos, there's very clearly a cord coming out the back, so it's not fully wireless, and I was waiting for what it meant. Basically means that it has to to be connected to power or to an external battery pack. And the last major piece of tech is optic ID. It's scanning your retina, and basically just like Face ID or Touch ID, it's going to be unique to you, and it'll all be stored on device so Apple doesn't get like all of that information on you, allegedly. Okay, so why did I put PSVR 2 in the title of this video? 3 specific pieces of tech: the eye tracking, foveated rendering, and spatial audio. All 3 things that the PSVR 2 in some capacity does as well. Spatial audio, effectively 3D audio on the PlayStation side. Eye tracking, which we've already seen works really well with the PSVR 2, and then it leads to foveated rendering. Now that specifically is key because it improves efficiency on graphical fidelity and performance, meaning that the Vision Pro, just like the PSVR 2, is tracking your eyesight to render at higher resolutions where specifically you're looking on the display. This is a really smart way of keeping high performance 4K level without needing a bunch of power from a computer or a console. Obviously PSVR 2 is tethered to PS5, but it's a similar idea considering that it's a base M2 chip, it seems like, on the Vision Pro. Hell, I thought that the Meta Quest 3 was going to be more of a competitor to the Apple headset rather than PSVR 2, but even that's not the case. I'm not entirely sold on the vision here that Apple's trying to give us, especially not at this price point. The idea that you're doing spatial computing on top of some entertainment consumption in a VR, AR type space, when you can do each of those right now standalone or mix and match 2 different devices that are going to be cheaper than the Vision Pro, is where they're losing me a little bit. 3D VR media consumption is already a thing that exists on PC VR or on the standalone headsets, and while gaming has gotten much better on Apple devices, it's still not quite the same as a standalone Quest or a dedicated console or PC. Not to mention that from a purely productivity standpoint as well, you can get more powerful M2 devices from a MacBook right now. Now, I think that Apple is leveraging a lot of the technology that's in this headset to justify that price point. So is it overpriced for what it is? I don't know, but it's still very expensive as a whole. This isn't a consumer product anymore. Just like any VR, you can't really make a true determination on how much value it's worth until you actually use it and put it on. But as a PSVR 2 owner, I think a lot of people compare the PSVR 2 to other headsets that cost $300, $400, $500 without the need of a PC. But I never thought that PSVR 2 was competing with those headsets. The price of a PS5 and a PSVR 2 puts you a little bit over $1,000. That's a third of the price of this Apple Vision Pro. Obviously, a third of the price means that it's only focused on gaming. You're tethered to the PS5 exclusively. But the original PSVR ultimately did add 3D support for movies and media. And now, of course, it's a much more powerful gaming device for those purposes. These aren't one-to-one comparisons. I do think that this makes the PSVR 2's price point a lot more enticing. And I think people will now see that the PSVR 2 is swinging well above its price range. Still expensive, but swinging at headsets twice its price. As a whole, it seems like Apple is trying to have a specific vision with the spatial computing concept, and of course I would love to receive one Apple and review it here directly, but as an everyday technology consumer, I don't know where this niche fits. It's a tough one. We're gonna have to wait and see what all the hands-on impressions look like from all the developers and media outlets over at Apple this week. And if you're online at all, you already know that this is a very polarizing device. Some people love it, some people don't like it at all. Let me know where you stand. I think I'm a little bit on the fence. I like the technology, I like the concept itself, but for this price, it feels too much like a first iteration that they're going to learn from and improve on in the next versions. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. If you did, I have a review of Tears of the Kingdom coming up very soon. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. My name is Danny with the DMGT once again. I'll catch you next time.